Staats-24 debate. We're plotting Algeria's future at a time when there's been speculation over the health of the president, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, in France for treatment after what authorities call a mini-stroke. He hasn't been seen in public since April the 17th. With us to talk about it, Karim Amelal, lecturer at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Alexandre Kateb, economist, author of The New World Powers, Why the BRICS Are Changing the World. Political scientist Pierre Conessa, author of The Manufacturing of an Enemy, or How to Kill with a Clean Conscience. We were talking in part one of our discussion about how there's all this murky shadows in Algeria. There's free speech on the one hand, but the actual decision-making takes place well behind closed doors. And behind the closed doors that are closed, there's the world's longest-serving head of intelligence, General Mohamed Mediane, a.k.a. General Toufik, who's been spy chief in Algeria since 1990. This is, I think, one of the only pictures we have of him. Here's how the Financial Times' Borzou Daragahi describes him. He says he's the man with no face, and even when he appears at grandstands to survey military parades, Algerian journalists know enough not to photograph General Mediane, the head of the country's Directorate for Intelligence and Security. Karim Amelal, is this the guy in charge?
He's supposed to be. Of course, he's very powerful for decades in Algeria, and he embodies the secret or the hidden role of the secret services in Algeria and more generally of the army. And this is the case since the independence. So yes, this is a very powerful man in Algeria nowadays, and even more powerful than the president himself.
Pierre Conessa, is he the godfather, the one who will be the kingmaker, or is he the king himself?
Well, there are two kind of different interpretations. The first one is that this guy is the number one, is the godfather. But another interpretation say that there is a kind of group, deciding collectively what could be the next, etc. For example, when Boumediene died, just remember that Chadli was just the eldest in the higher rank, which means that
General Chadli, who then became president.
Yes. So it was exactly a military process. It was not the best. It was just the one which has been chosen by the others, So who could say precisely what will be the decision of the army? I don't know. No, I do think that, as I was explaining, the question is what could be the political legitimacy of the new regime. This generation is dying, which means that the new one couldn't use anymore, the independence war, the Mujahideen history, etc.
Yeah, which means that today, you say, well, look, I fought in the War of Independence. That kind of ends an argument, doesn't it?
Yeah. And today the question is the economic reform in Algeria, which means that you have to balance and you have to change all the power of military men on economy. And this is a more destabilizing discourse, speeches of political affairs.
Alexandre Kateb, those watching us in Egypt will say this sounds very familiar, that these were generals who were there to fight wars, and a lot of them now are in business as well.
Well, I mean, there are some similarities between Algeria and Egypt, of course, the role of the military, but it's also very different. The context is different, the history is different. In Egypt, the military control directly the economy. They control large chunks of the economy, large state enterprises, which are basically within the military establishment. So they are more exposed and they are more inclined to make everything to keep their economic power as well. In Algeria, it's different. The military play a role behind the scenes, but they are not exposed in the economic area. Not even the security services, which, for example, play a very strong role in Russia. It's not the same in Algeria.
But hang on a second then. Algeria, lots of oil, lots of gas. They've paid off all their debts to the to donors, to the IMF, and who controls all that money?
No, definitely.
Who controls that money?
I mean, the army controls where the money comes from and where it goes. It has its say on where the money goes and all the strategic projects, etc. But it doesn't manage that money. And I agree with Pierre Conessa. There are different circles of power and centers of power, including in the economic sphere, because you have also all this senior management in the public enterprises. You have all the bureaucracies, the ministries that also have their say on where the money is going and on how it is managed. If you take Sonatrach, it is a state within the state. And Sonatrach
the national,
has the
national oil and gas
company, and it has some kind of operational independence or autonomy, although it has to report to the political and military establishment. But so to say, it's more complicated than in Egypt, where you see clearly that there are generals, they have all their enterprises, and they are exposed, and everybody can see more or less where the money goes and where the money comes from. In Algeria, it's much more difficult, it's much more hidden.
You mentioned Sonatrach. Back in January, the world was shocked to discover there was a hostage siege at the In Amenas gas complex, which is jointly run by the state gas company, BP and Statoil. Algerian authorities, by the way, ignoring outside advice, going in guns a-blazing. 38 hostages killed, along with their captors. This kind of event where jihadists were able to seize a strategic gas installation there near the Libyan border, that was virtually unprecedented. It wasn't seen when there was the civil war years of the late 90s.
You stress a very important point, and of course In Amenas revealed the important or the major role of army in Algeria, and that's why because of terrorism, because of jihadism, because of the civil war, 10 years of civil war in the 90s, 200,000 people killed. So it still structures the national psyche in Algeria. And that's why also army remains very important and plays a very important role, even though army is divided into many factions, many different factions that want to control some part of the state and of the economy. But that's because In Amenas occurred, and because terrorism is still alive in some part of the country, that army has a role to play now.
Pierre Conessa, what impact will In Amenas have on the transition process lying ahead, if there is one?
Well, it's quite difficult to address your question because, Algeria is just going out of 10 years of civil war in which the army has to face, rebellion and terrorist actions, etc., which remains today, which means that In Amenas is not by itself sufficient to explain the role of the army. No, the main question is Algeria is that, as the Algerian people used to say, Algeria is a rich country with a poor population. And the main question, politically speaking, is how to do with the oil rent. And one of the questions, because the last scandal, corruption, bribery scandal in Algeria is the Sonatrach, in which the former Ministry of Energy
he had to flee the country, right?
Yeah. And it was presented as a bureaucrat, as a technocrat, as an American formed, trained guy. And the question in Algeria, the first point is to fight against bribery and corruption. Bouteflika itself, in 1999, was involved in bribery affairs when he was Minister of Foreign Affairs.
But even in that particular scandal, there are some who say, well, they only blew the whistle on him because he fell out with so and so. Even there seems to be this culture of plots and subterfuge.
Yes, because, there are no, as it was, for example, in Pakistan, a regime change at each election, which means that the new team is having, the trial of the former one. In Algeria, it's not the same from 1962 to today, which means that there are no real campaign against corruption because everybody is involved in corruption, which means that for public opinion today, the question is, what becomes this oil rent and how is it possible to spend the money on economic fields to give jobs, etc., etc. That is for me the main question today in Algeria.
So Alexandre Kateb, we see corruption and people are fed up with it. They say so vocally. We see mismanagement from a team that's been in power for too long. And yet, the Arab Spring seems to have somehow mostly overlooked Algeria, even though there were some protests at the beginning when it began in January 2011. But for the most part, seems relatively immune.
Well, there are two kinds of explanations. The first one is political, is because the people, they are tired of what they endured during the Black Decade, during the decade of terror in the 90s. So they don't want a kind of repetition of these events. So the street is much more, the man in the street is much more prudent, much more circumspect than in other countries. And the second explanation is economic, because if you look at the countries that were bypassed by the Arab Spring, you have Algeria, and you have also the Gulf monarchies. I mean, Saudi Arabia, there were some attempts at, fomenting some kind of movement, but it was crushed under a pile of petrodollars. And this is what the authorities in Algeria have done. They have not changed really the nature of the system, but they have managed so far to dilute the discontent and to wash people with money, including the young people. They gave them some money to buy a truck and start their own transportation business. But the sector is not organized, and these people have no training in transportation so far. So it's only for the eye, for illusion, and the rent system is still very, very deeply ingrained in the economy. But there is an awareness at the same time. There is an awareness, including in some in the power, including, for example, the new Prime Minister, Abdelmalek Sellal, who is more aware of these questions, and including in the security services. So far as I know, there is a growing awareness of the need to change the model. And let's hope that this process of change will be shared, that they will bring more experts, including from the diaspora, that will try to help the Algerian people and the Algerian government manage this transition out of a rent-based economy into a more sustainable development model.
But can you change the model when, as we were saying before the show, we were talking about how this culture of suspicion, of plotting, is very much ingrained in the political elite. So can the model be changed? Can you put in checks and balances and this sort of thing?
I hope so, of course. I hope so. The situation is very dark nowadays, and that's why I don't wish, of course, the tragic consequence of Bouteflika's death or coma, or I don't know what could happen. But what's very not enthusiastic, but what makes me quite optimistic is the renewal of generation within the system. Obviously, because as you say previously, this generation, the 62 generation, has just come to the end with Bouteflika, with Medienne, the General Medienne, and a lot of other people with Ouyahia and so on. So this is obvious that another generation in the economic field, in the grassroots of society, will come up one day. Of course, maybe not at the next election, but one day in the 5 or 10 years. I just want to stress something, because it's very important, and you stress that with your question, why Algerians stand still in the context of the Arab Spring. And Alexander talked about that. It's because we perceive what happens now in Tunisia or Egypt as the accurate or exact repetition of October 88 in Algeria. And the sequence is exactly the same. And we have to keep it in mind.
In October 1988, you have free elections.
Riots, exactly.
And
they ousted.
And when the elections happen, it's the Islamists who win the first round.
in Muslim countries, this is just the only structured and organized force in the opposition. The only opponents in Algeria now, like in Egypt or in Tunisia, are Islamists, and we have to keep it in mind. So because of October 88 and because, of course, of the 10 years of civil war, Algerians stand still, very still, in the context of the Arab Spring, because the sequence is exactly the same. And what happens now with President Bouteflika is that a corrupted, quite corrupted and very hated regime, is ousted by riots or something like that. Then there is a transition process, democratic process, and so on. And after that, you have Islamists. And Islamists, we knew that for 10 years in Algeria. And you know what has come up with that situation. So this is very important, and it structures the representations of Algerians people nowadays in the country. I think so.
You describe it that way, but when you see the complaining about the corruption, when you see, according to the Algerian Central Bank, foreign direct investment was down 15% last year. Small businesses are complaining. At what point? When is the tipping point then? How long do people stay silent?
Of course,
as long as there is a rent, revenue that balances the budget, that there is some kind of some time. They try the regime tries to buy some time with this distribution and redistribution of the rent and the oil and gas revenue. But if you look at all the projections, they show that the oil peak and the gas peak are very close in Algeria, maybe in the next 10 years or 20 years, and then there will be nothing left, or there will be much less resources. And the needs are growing, consumption is growing, the demography is dynamic, and there is every year 300,000 new people, new young people looking for jobs. And the economy doesn't create all these jobs. So at some point, there will be clearly an explosion or a very strong imbalance between what the regime can offer and what the people really need.
Barring reform. I want to thank you, Alexandre Kateb. I want to thank Pierre Conessa. Also, I want to thank as well Karim Amelal for joining us. Thank you for being with us here for the France 24 debate.